Hello, and welcome to the Vicars Watch Dibley,
the podcast where real priests talk about pop culture and what we've learnt about faith, life and the church. We've watched Dibley and now we're watching everything else. I'm Kate.
I'm Ross.
And I'm Ruthie, and today we are talking about Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So be prepared as Kate and Ross nerd out on this nostalgic TV show that is so important to so many people. So we talk a bit about vampire lore, all that goes on with that, but most importantly about calling. And when you're called to do something, how do you take on that calling?
In every generation, there are chosen ones. They alone will stand against the heathens, the heretics, and the forces of darkness. They are the Vicars Watch Dibley. Hello! A holy happy hello to you all!
Hello!
We're in our vicarages. You're listening in. We're ready and raring to talk about Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Hey!
Hooray! But first,
Hooray!
we're gonna do some notices, because we're Anglicans.
Yeah.
I have a little notice. It's something I'm looking forward to, and it feels slightly related to talking about Buffy and whatnot. Some of our young people here at the cathedral that I'm working with are really nerdy into board games and Dungeons and Dragons. So I'm going to be trialling a little something with them in November, where we play board games and play maybe a bit of D&D, but like cathedral themed, somehow.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Amazing.
That sounds really fun. I did something a bit similar in one of my previous churches where I started a D&D group with some other nerdy types because I wanted a group to play D&D with. It wasn't really church related, it was just normal D&D. But it was fellowship with other church people, and for particularly people on the outskirts who maybe wouldn't come to a Bible study.
Sure.
It was a really good way of building relationships. Oh, I miss it.
Well, so, I was messaging our editor Nat about it, and I was like, "Oh yeah, we could have there could be a bard who's like a chorister build, and we could have a monk who's a monk." Mm-hmm. Anyway, that's very nerdy D&D speak. Apologies, listeners who are outside of the talk.
And we just need to get this done, don't we? Where we do the Vicars of Dibley, Vicar of Dibley D&D session that we've talked about for ages.
Dungeons
and
Dibley.
Dungeons and Dibley.
Dungeons and Dibley.
Yes.
Or Dibley and Dragons.
Oh, Dibley and Dragons. We'll play around with that idea. I mean, I've been trying to encourage you to and Nat to have a kind of a monthly D&D sesh. Anyway, so we'll see what we can do. And listeners, if you are interested in us doing a real play D&D podcast episode, completely switting our podcast genre, do let us know. Who knows? Maybe that's what people want to listen to.
But we want to do it. So there might be one or two.
Just let us know whether it's Dungeons and Dibley or Dibley and Dragons. Let us know that, listeners.
Yes.
Yeah.
That could be the question for this
week. Or
week.
something else. Who knows? Anyway,
so that was my notice. Do either of you have any notices?
Only that yesterday, so I didn't tell you we're going to do this. The heavens opened yesterday. We're recording on the 17th of October. On the 16th of October, we had such a rainstorm that the schools got cancelled.
No way!
Yeah, I live in such a rural area that they were like, it's not safe for people to travel. So, like, schools were closing, and I did a visit, and I was driving back, and I was thinking, it's fine, like, I'm just in my one village, I'm not leaving my village, it's not like I'm going to get caught in a big ditch or anything, flooded with rain, just driving through my village, I was like, oh, this puddle's a bit deep, so weird, yeah, oh my goodness.
You're pretty rural, Ruthie. How was the weather with you?
Well,
The Great
same,
Rain.
but I'm the Great Rain, but I live on top of the mountain, so other bits of the parish are affected. But yeah, I am quite fortunate living at the top of the hill. So, but should we nerd out? Well, you guys are gonna nerd out. You're just gonna. I'm gonna be ignorant and try my best.
Well, we have watched Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And Kate, you have brought this to us. How about you give us a summary of Buffy the Vampire Slayer for those who are not in the know?
Okay, so Buffy the Vampire Slayer was a 1990s supernatural-themed TV show about a teenage girl who is a vampire slayer, and her name is Buffy, which really is kind of all you need to know. It's set as she goes to high school, and she is fighting against the powers of darkness. She hangs around and she patrols a graveyard at night and slays vampires. It's created and written and directed by Joss Whedon, who those of us in 2024 will be more familiar as the person who did the first Avengers movie. But it's also based on it was originally a 1992 film,
that's right.
Then became a TV series starring Sarah Michelle Gellar.
Absolute queen.
The
Love
sort of
her.
series begins with her moving to this town called Sunnydale, where it's sort of set almost like a sequel to the movie, which ends with Buffy burning down her school gym, and now Buffy is in Sunnydale, although technically she's a different character, however we're going to work this out. And she had to move because she burnt down the school gym of her old school, and so she's starting out with a new school in a new town, determined to put vampire slaying behind her. But it transpires that there is already a watcher, a mentor named Rupert Giles, ready there to welcome her and bring her back into slaying and train her. And also, it transpires that Sunnydale is a Hellmouth.
A Hellmouth? My goodness. What's a Hellmouth?
A Hellmouth is a mouth to hell.
Go figure.
It's a centre for supernatural activity which draws demons out of hell and to Earth.
It's a lovely excuse for there to be lots of demons.
Exactly.
And a disproportionate amount of demons in this town than in anywhere else in America.
The kind of key characters you need to know are Buffy Summers, who is our main character. She's allegedly 16. You have her best friends, Willow and Xander.
Why is she allegedly 16?
Well, she doesn't look 16. Then you have her rival, Cordelia, who becomes a bit of a frenemy in later seasons. You have her initial love interest, Angel, who is himself a vampire, and he gets his own spin-off series later on.
Wait,
you
what?
Have her watcher, who's Rupert Giles, who is just a lovely man.
And played by Anthony Head.
Anthony Head.
You may know as a very good British actor. King Uther in Merlin.
Or the headmaster from the school reunion episode of Doctor Who.
And also in Ted Lasso. So I went on a whole deep dive IMDb search with him because he plays Rupert in Ted Lasso. And then I was like, oh, he has daughters. Oh, what do his daughters? They're all actors as well. And one of them, I can't read my writing now. Emily Head, she was in In-Betweeners. She was Carly in In-Betweeners.
No way!
And the other daughter is called Daisy, and linking back to all the stuff that we've been talking about, she is an actor in Shadow and Bone. Did you watch that?
I didn't watch it, but I was aware of it. Yeah.
She's a healer person, and she's also in Dungeons and Dragons, the film.
Who does she play in Dungeons and Dragons, the film?
She's the cool impy girl who can transform, shapeshift into different
That's Anthony Head's daughter. That's amazing. Okay.
Yeah.
There you go. You're welcome.
Actually, Buffy is... There are a lot of actors and actresses in Buffy who you will recognise from other things. So Willow's played by Alison Hannigan, who was in How I Met Your Mother. That's her rather long-running series. Xander Harris, played by Nicholas Brendan, who he kind of gets about in the geeky shows, but I particularly recognised him in Criminal Minds. He plays a character in Criminal Minds.
Right.
And like later on, there's Angel's played by David Boreanaz, who's in Bones, the TV series. There's a later character called Oz, who is played by Seth Green, who you'll recognise from Austin Powers and Robot Chicken.
Yeah.
Basically, there's lots of characters who you will recognise, because it shows sort of a bit of it nurtured quite a lot of the talents who are kind of more familiar names nowadays. But at the time, they were new actors.
It's kind of the show that you watch with IMDb open and just go, where do I know that person from?
Yeah.
I mean, in some ways, it's kind of what Doctor Who is to Britain, to what to what Buffy is in America. In that way that you see actors, and what was nice about Buffy is that, like, I don't think it was an immediate hit, but it still got the opportunity to find its identity over a couple of seasons, which most shows nowadays aren't afforded that luxury. And they'll get cancelled after one series before anyone really has a chance to discover it, or for the show to find out what it is.
Yeah, it very much was a cult classic that kind of grew in popularity as it found its feet and became popular enough to have the spin-off series Angel. When they decided that Angel had run out of usefulness as a story element in Buffy, they sent him off to do his own thing. And Angel was actually quite a good show, had a number of seasons as well. And there is still a comic carrying on Buffy as well. The story isn't over. It's a good show, and it dealt early on in it with queer storylines before that was really something we were seeing as normalised on TV. Didn't always deal with them well, but they were there.
It was a show that I think was quite groundbreaking at the time and really challenged a lot of stereotypes. First and foremost, the horror stereotype of blonde girl always being the damsel in distress. And actually, we're going to get into the first episode in a bit, but that is a trope in movies that Buffy immediately turns on its head.
Yeah.
But we're going to, first of all, we've had our summary. Now, Ruthie, you haven't really seen Buffy before. So before me and Kate get deep into the lore and how, our favourite bits and episodes and whatnot, how about you share with us your first impressions, your initial reflections?
So I hadn't seen any Buffy at all previously. Wow. I was kind of aware of some characters. Well, so when it came out, I was 6 in 1997. And it so I never really watched it, and I think I was at the kind of Christian churches that would have gone, this is demons and horrible, let's not engage in this. And I'm not actually even sure what channel it was on, whether it was on something that I wasn't able to access or anything like that. The things that I knew about Buffy before watching were, number one, it was the sexual awakening for so many people who watched it and therefore became a bit of and was a queer iconic thing as part of it. I knew there was a kind of Team Spike or Team Angel thing going on as part of it. I knew that everyone loves Sarah Michelle Gellar because of this. And I knew that she dealt with vampires, and that's about it. Like, I didn't know anything else about Buffy other than those things. So you told us to watch the first episode, but after the first episode, it finished in a bit of a weird place, I think. I thought I probably need to watch another one just because I have no idea what's going on, really, and I've been introduced to these characters. So I wrote down their names about Xander, Willow, Cordelia, Jessie, and then Friend. Because I looked at him and thought, I think that's Angel, but he just described himself as Friend. And And I assumed these would be the kind of core characters for the rest of this. I mean, by episode 2, Jesse's gone because he's been turned into a vampire, and then his mates accidentally stabbed him with a stake. I mean, all of this stuff. And then there was the librarian, who was described as the Watcher, and then did the whole IMDb on Anthony Head. And I had lots of questions about, does Mum know about her being a Slayer or not? I thought maybe she does, but then I thought maybe she doesn't. And by the second episode, I was like, oh no, she doesn't know that she's a Slayer. And then generally, I think I don't have the nostalgia with it that you guys have. So I was watching going, this is terrible because the action sequences are interesting. The makeup for those guys who've turned into vampires, you can see it peeling off their cheeks at different points. And it's also 90s with the blue eyeshadow. And I'm going, who's letting these 16-year-olds out to a club every night where they can get alcohol and there's dark shadows? And why on earth are you going to a graveyard alone with a stranger? Like, this is like all stranger danger, disaster. But I also knew it was taking itself very seriously from the intro credits because it's spelt vampire, VAMPYR, as opposed to the way that the rest of people spell it. So
Vampire rather than vampire.
Yeah. So I was, I don't have the nostalgia about it and had lots of questions, and I laughed a lot because of the action. Whereas I think you guys kind of look at those things, like the fact that the makeup's peeling off and all this stuff, with kind of, and
it does get better.
Cues.
I came to Buffy later, really. I came to it when I was at university, and one of my housemates loved it and would have it on all the time. So that's when I first really got to know Buffy. I was aware of it, and I think I used to see the end of it before something else came on, because I kind of remember a couple of cliffhangers and the arrgh end credit bit. Anyway.
Whatever it is,
but I mean, those early episodes are rough, and that's because it's a new show. It doesn't have the budget, and actually the tech and the CGI move on over the whole course of the series as they're learning. And there's a really interesting fact about how expensive it is to have to dust a vampire. When a vampire is staked, it turns to dust, and that's like something like $1 million or something per dusting.
Wow.
So that's why so much of that happens off screen, because it's so expensive. But it is rough in its first series, but it's nice that it's given the chance to find its feet and work out what it wants to be.
I have to say, I did really enjoy the beginning of it though, when it's the kind of high school cliche of super jock bad boy guy breaks into school with girl to go for a makeout session and all this stuff, and she's all like, oh, we shouldn't be doing this, baby. Oh, what's that noise? Oh, I'm all scared and all this. And you hear the noises, and knowing it was a vampire show, I was thinking, all right, someone's going to come and eat them at some point. But then no, it's her. She suddenly gets ugly and eats him. And I was like, oh. So that was
another subversion.
Kickoff.
That's another subversion of that blonde victim trope. One blonde nasty. Is the vampire villain, and the other blonde is the one that kills them. And
I did wonder, because there's the main kind of the villain guy who's stuck somewhere. And I was like, oh, I wonder if that's Spike, but not Pretty, because I've never seen this before. But I don't think it is. But he was weird.
Yeah.
He was something.
Yeah. So Spike kind of bursts in to the scene. It's season 2 he appears, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's just supposed to be as a guest character for an episode or two, with another character called Drusilla.
Yeah.
But actually, there was such a positive fan response to Spike that he is invited back to be a series regular. He's basically in every episode from season 4 onwards or something.
So Angel is actually a vampire.
Yes. So,
wow, that's a plot twist.
But Angel has a soul. So normally vampires are soulless. And so before he had the soul, Angel was called Angelus, and he was super big bad vampire, like, who ran with the crew of the Angel. So, the vampire who in the first season they're trying to resurrect is like the master vampire of a whole little group of big bad vampires, of whom Angel used to be one of them, and Spike was also part of that group. So there's whole relationship dynamics within the big bads of how they all relate to each other. But then Angel was cursed with his soul, and suddenly realised how evil he was, and became a big pity party. And tried to be a good guy. You can probably tell that I don't like Angel. I'm very much Team Spike.
You're Team Spike.
Angel, but there's one of the recurring plot devices is Angel loses his soul again and suddenly becomes evil again. And actually, the first time that happens on the show is a really emotional and poignant one, because it's after he and Buffy sleep together for the first time. And he disappears, spoiler alert, he disappears the morning after. And so actually that's when some of the storytelling gets really good, because you have Buffy's struggle of, well, is it just because this is what men do when you finally, you know...
And a lot of that supernatural stuff is are helpful ways to explore teen experiences when you might be gaslit, your first experience of maybe drink culture or drugs or relationships or exam stress. There's one where
just
the internet
shove some demons in there as well.
Well, there's one episode where the internet basically is a demon.
So. Oh my goodness, the episode, I've forgotten about that one. Yeah, there's a demon on the internet. And
oh my gosh.
It's also, I mean, that's when things start becoming real for Buffy as well. So I think up until that point in the storytelling, she is kind of she doesn't really take the slaying as seriously, or she doesn't quite feel that personal responsibility as much. But then after she kind of feels responsible for this big bad vampire losing his soul and becoming evil again,
what, he loses his soul because he has sex with her?
Yeah, because he had a perfect moment of happiness or something stupid like that.
That's so...
And then he goes hunting
culture.
Everyone she knows and loves. So, yeah. But then the storytelling from that point on is actually quite deep, and you have this exploration of relationships, and Buffy's kind of struggle with... She becomes kind of... Yeah, I don't want to spoil it too much, but like I said, after the first season, things get a bit more interesting. And I love Spike, so I think it gets good when Spike appears. But I mean, he was beloved so much that they had to make him not be an evil bad character anymore. So they eventually give him a soul. But first they get him trying to be good, and then he goes off and gets himself a soul, and he has a big sacrifice as well.
Do stick with it, Ruthie, if you like, because there are some excellent episodes. One of my favourite ones is called Hush, where everybody loses their voice. So it's basically, it's almost like a silent movie. And on the other side of that, there's also a musical episode where there's a demon who makes everybody sing and dance, and it's the best. So do stick with it, please.
Yeah.
Why would you get rid of that
demon? We can sing it together.
In fact, I think the musical episode was one of the first episodes I properly watched, because it had been on my peripheral. And when I was like you, kind of when I was at uni, that's when I properly delved into it. And I think I'd heard about the musical episode, and I was like, oh, that's interesting, so I watched it, and then went back through and rewatched it.
One of the things you mentioned earlier, Ruthie, was the question of whether Joyce, who is Buffy's mum, whether she knows that her daughter is a Slayer or not. And at the beginning she doesn't. And there is this really interesting relationship that Buffy has with being the Slayer. She's got to keep it secret. It means that she's got to go and do various, sneak out at night to go and kill vampires, and she's got this very weighty calling on her life. And I thought it might be worth just talking a little bit about that call to her being a slayer.
Yeah. Is there an episode that, because it's kind of the beginning episode, she just is it, and she's got a secret compartment in a kind of chest that's got a chest of drawers thing that's got steaks and holy water and wafers of communion and all of this stuff. So is it kind of, does she explain how she became the Slayer? How that all happens?
There are no flashbacks or anything.
But we do learn the lore of how Slayers are called. So there's only one girl at a time who awakens as a Slayer, but there's lots of potentials, and they are watched by this little organisation called the Watchers, who they observe to see if one of them is going to awaken, and then one of them awakens as a Slayer. They start having dreams about vampires, and they become super strong, and then the Watcher steps in and trains them until they die. And then the next one awakens.
And there are potential elements to draw in parallels, if you like, in terms of the Watchers being the church to people who are called to the priesthood. You could look at Buffy almost as a messianic figure, and that exploration of sacrificial living and dying.
Yeah, but I think what's particularly interesting for us, and why I suggest we watch that first episode, is that she struggles with that call and she doesn't want to follow it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've all been there, done that, haven't we?
It is also interesting, I mean, as a little side note, the way that her... So, spoiler alert, Joyce finds out that Buffy is a Slayer. And she's not too happy about it. And in that episode,
weird.
The whole language around being a Slayer is slightly queer-coded. Yeah. So Joyce says, have you tried not being the Slayer?
Yeah.
In the same way that young queer people maybe said, well, have you tried not being gay? Maybe it's a phase. Yeah. And actually, in the early seasons, Buffy is desperate just to be normal.
Yeah.
But then she has this great sort of monologue in that episode where she comes out as the Slayer.
Yeah. And she gets kicked out as well, doesn't she? Doesn't Joyce kick her out?
Yes, she's kicked out of the house at one point. Yeah. I mean, there are other shenanigans going on, I think, sort of demon spirity stuff. But
So I mean, for Buffy to be called to be the Slayer is to be an outsider, and but she desperately wants to be normal. She wants to
be a cheerleader.
And
have a boyfriend.
To be a boyfriend. Have a boyfriend. She wants to be a boyfriend.
She wants to underage drink at the club.
And she wants to pass her classes. And just coast away, not really being noticed by the principal of the school. She does choose not to be part of a popular crowd. And I think that's because she just wants to be kind of an invisible, normal student.
I did like Cordelia to begin with. She was really nice, being friendly, and then she bullied the nerd, and I was like, oh, that's a shame.
Yeah, so let's talk about some of these other characters around her. We've already talked about Buffy, and Buffy kind of not wanting to be called, and, talking about how she just wants to be normal, and she doesn't want to do any of the vampire slaying stuff anymore. She doesn't want to be a Slayer. She's not going to... She still hates vampires, and she'll still slay one if she sees one, but she's not going to go seeking them out. And she's not going to get way extracurricular, as she says. I love that. We'll talk about that in a moment. But she has these other cast of characters around her who fill different roles in relation to her calling. So let's start with Cordelia, since we were just talking about her. She's very much a discourager, in that terms of, we have that scene in that first episode of Buffy storming into the bathroom, is it? Kind of with a stake, and then Cordelia kind of then tells everyone.
Calls her out in her weirdness.
Calls her out, in her weirdness.
But there's also a sense in which Cordelia is who Buffy could be if Buffy wasn't the Slayer.
Yeah.
She's the perfect cheerleader, perfect teenager. They're sort of set up as opposites, I suppose.
Yeah. An alternative universe.
Yeah, and I think this is a struggle that those of us who've experienced a call, and that is a sense of purpose to do something. And if you're Christian, you feel that's God calling you to do something, particularly for us calling us to be vicars. But any sort of sense of vocation that marks you as other, whatever that could be. For those of us who live with that, particularly who experienced that as teenagers, which I know all three of us do and did, you have that sense of if only I didn't have this, then I could be normal.
Yeah.
Or I could be, the popular girl, and I wouldn't be so weird. I wouldn't be such an outsider. And there's a contrast with Cordelia, which I think really it is a driving force as well. Like you said, it's who Buffy really wishes she could be, but isn't.
Let's talk about some of those weirdos that Buffy does hang out with. So instead of hanging out with Cordelia, she hangs out with Willow and Xander.
Yes. So, Ruthie, what did you think about Willow and Xander?
Willow, I just thought was kind of your typical nerdy girl. Hello, she's ginger and a nerd. Well, there we go. That's stereotyping. Not all as gingers and nerds. Some of us peaked in primary school. I knew about her because she comes out as a lesbian later on, doesn't she? And so I knew about her before watching about her being iconic like that. And she's just very sweet but very naive and goes into a graveyard with a total stranger. Just think, where's the parenting here? And then Xander, I thought he was a bit boring. I thought Jessie was more interesting. And then Jessie disappears. So I was like, oh, okay, Xander's going to be a part of it. But Xander, does he fancy Buffy? That seemed to be a bit
everyone. But yes, Buffy particularly.
Okay.
So they sort of fill specific roles, I think. It's called the Scooby Gang. They call themselves the Scoobies. Which, to draw parallels to a work written by She Who Must Not Be Named, they're sort of Hermione and Ron.
Got you.
In that sense of, you've got the really intelligent researcher, and the kind of the slacker who... Xander's very
Comic
much a
relief.
doubter. He kind of is a voice of questioning things, and he very much wants to be with Buffy. And we see later on that becomes a source of conflict as well, particularly when she's with Angel, and then there's also with Spike, where he's a very negative voice, as much as being her friend.
Is he slightly incelly that he deserves her attention?
It does get a little bit like that. I don't know if you felt that, Ross.
Yeah, certainly he represents a particular type of nerd and fanboy, I think, which is a common experience for a lot of teenage boys, I think. So, and it's interesting how those qualities are explored through the supernatural in terms of falling into gangs, and relationships and crushes and love and all that sort of stuff.
And they're still
it's hard
friends,
work being
though.
a teenager, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's interesting that we
Demons and all this
follow
stuff
them into young adulthood as well. And it is interesting to see how they mature into adulthood. And Xander especially, as he reconciles himself within a gang that becomes increasingly supernatural, and he remains the ordinary man.
Yeah.
Oh, bless him.
Yeah, and he eventually does have growth, and he eventually he falls in love with someone else who isn't Buffy, which is a fantastic moment.
Hooray!
And Willow is a really interesting character because she does go dark at one point. She starts dabbling in magic, and she gets really kind of hung up on magic being able to solve everything. And there's one episode where she casts, it's a My Will Be Done spell, where she, everything she says comes true. So things like she says that, Buffy is obsessed with Spike. Why doesn't she go marry him? And so they are suddenly engaged and believe themselves to be in love. And Xander gets pursued by loads of women as well. Is that episode?
I don't remember that episode off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
So, you sort of see her kind of going dark and then being brought back. And she has a queer awakening as well.
Cool.
And she's an interesting character because she fills Giles's role a little bit as well, being a researcher and having all that information there.
Giles I found interesting. Yeah, he was like, I get that he's actually the Watcher or whatever his name is, but actually for the librarian at the school, he hangs out with the teenagers a bit too much.
Yeah.
Like, there's a safeguarding risk here.
But Buffy calls that out, doesn't she?
Yeah,
in
she
that
does.
first episode, she says,
she does.
Him hanging around in the club where all the teenagers are is a bit creepy.
Yeah.
He's really keen. It's sad because he's really keen initially when he meets Buffy, and he's like, "I know exactly what you want," and brings out this big vampire book. She's like, "No, I just wanted my course books." It's that really interesting role of being the mentor. Where
He's slightly John the Baptist figure, I think.
Yeah. And Buffy says, "Why don't you just do it?" And he says, "No, that's not my role. It's not my job to hunt the vampires." But he does get more involved as later seasons go on. And his perception of... If you think of him as being the very indoctrinated church member, someone, like, to parallel, someone who's super within the Church of England and the track, and like, anyone who is called by God has to follow a very specific pattern. We've all met people like that. But through the course of the show, he broadens his definition of what being a slayer means, of what hunting as a team. Previous slayers haven't worked as a team, but Buffy is very keen to. And challenging some of things he's been told he has to do, which he eventually decides either were bad decisions or that he doesn't want to do anymore.
One of my favourite episodes is one where Buffy feels really torn between being told what to do and how to do things. It's towards a season finale. And she finds her voice, where she speaks against the Watchers who are trying to control her and say, actually, I know what I'm doing here, and you're going to listen to me. And it's really interesting to see Giles within that institution, where he is cast out for not behaving as he ought to have done. So it's really interesting to see those parallels with the church, I think, frankly. Actually, to what extent does the church as an institution interfere and suppress the gifts and the talents of the people, the priests and those who are called within their contexts to serve, and who know their communities and who know their people. Giles is a fascinating character to see institution through.
Yeah. And then let's talk about Angel and Spike.
So Angel, I would have assumed, just from the name, that he would have been an angel and would have been like a support. So if there's lots of demons appearing from downstairs, there's support from upstairs, to use an incorrect analogy. That's what I thought he was going to be. But now you're telling me he's a vampire. What?
Yeah. And to be honest, I'm going to say this. I've already said I don't like Angel. I think Angel is well creepy, especially in that first episode. He's kind of essentially stalking a teenager, and he is quite old, actually. Even before, even just going by how he looks, he looks like he's in his 20s, 30s. He should not be around a teenage girl. But anyway, with Angel and later Spike, you have two vampires who choose to essentially be slayers. They choose to
join the Scoobies.
Yeah, to be part of the Scoobies, or even to do it on their own. They're sort of choosing to be good and to fight for good. when all of their natural inclinations would draw them in the opposite direction. Angel, because he's been given a soul and he's trying to make amends for the evil he's done before. But then, I mean, one of the reasons I love Spike is it is an actual choice before he has a soul telling him what's good to decide to model his moral compass after Buffy, really, and what Buffy would approve of and what she wouldn't approve of. But yeah, you sort of have that change and almost being on parallel tracks to Buffy. Although they are not the chosen ones, they are still participating in the ministry, as we might call it.
Well, there's a redemptive arc to their identities and their storylines. Ruthie.
Can I ask a very practical question then? If they're vampires, what do they eat? Are they still eating people? Or are have they gone Twilight vampire and are vegetarians in inverted columns?
From a butcher.
And I think... Oh, no, wait, I'm thinking of something else. Sorry.
Yeah, so I think vampires only eat blood in this?
Yes.
They don't need to eat.
They don't need to eat, yeah. They need to eat blood. And I think...
Oh, right. So they don't need to eat, but they do need to have blood.
Yeah, they need to have blood. So unlike Twilight, where if they eat human food, they just barf it back up again later, I think the Buffy vampires, they can eat it and they process it. It just doesn't do anything for them. I think.
I don't know. Correct us in the comments, listeners.
But I think that Angel and later Spike live off pig's blood.
Okay.
Is that something about getting blood from a hospital, or is that I'm thinking of a different vampire
Twilight.
show?
And
being human.
Blood, yeah, they have blood bags as well. So I don't know whether... So Spike goes on a journey. So I don't know if he starts out getting blood from a hospital. But basically, I think human blood is like with Twilight, makes you stronger and more powerful than animal blood, I think. I don't know. Was that true?
Yeah, but
blood?
what if you ate like a bear? Surely that's stronger.
There's too many different vampire laws out there. True Blood and Twilight and Buffy.
But this is the serious one because
what we do in the
vampire.
shadows. We need to talk about what we do in the shadows at some point.
Kate, you said earlier about Buffy referring to being a vampire slayer as like being way extracurricular into it. And sometimes when you have a calling on your life, you do kind of find yourself getting way extracurricular about it. And that's kind of how I ended up being a priest. I got way extracurricular into Christianity. So let's talk about us as teenagers and teenagers who were Christians. Like, how did we get way extracurricular as teenagers into ministry, into the church, into faith? What did that look like for you two?
So let's go back to our teenage selves and who we were at the age where we got way extracurricular into church. Ruthie, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I mean, my dad's a vicar, so I've been involved in church for a long time. As a teenager, I had a really good youth group that I was part of. So I had really good youth workers who were wonderful and supportive and, yes, possibly taught some unhelpful things, but that was the trend in evangelical Christianity at the time. But they really encouraged leadership and us being involved in the church and not just kind of hiding in the crypt bit, which is where we'd hang out, but being involved. So I remember I'm not even sure as a teenager, it might have even just been like 11 or 12, leading a service for the first time, that they got the kind of youth group to come and do this, and having notes, and I did it with the curate at the time, and we kind of swapped between the two, and I had a little script to do it, so yeah, it was pretty much inevitable, wasn't it? And I was very open, and it was very normal for me to invite people to church as well and to youth group. And so my friend came to youth group and stuff, and happily invited people over and all this stuff as just part of growing up. And so those leadership things were put in my way very quickly because I did get extracurricular, and there were other things that I just saw people were doing cool stuff, and the cool kids, as in like my leaders who were in their 20s and 30s, I was like, wow, you guys are cool. I want to be like you. And so went and did stuff with them. And so from a very young age, I was kind of, the path was kind of laid out. And it was only at 17 that I thought, oh, wait, this means ordination. Well, no, God said this means ministry and ordination eventually. And I went, oh, no, I wanted to be the cool Christian, not the lame Christian.
You wanted to be Cordelia, not Buffy.
Yeah, exactly. So, but that, as we've talked about our calling stories before, I won't go on to that bit. But as a teenager, it was just made very normal that I would be involved in leadership and the creative sides of stuff, and praying with people and exploring spiritual gifts and all this kind of stuff. It was just part and parcel with the church. Yeah. How about you, Kate?
So, I'm from a different church tradition, I guess, growing up. My dad's more liberal Catholic. So I was involved, but I think not in the same way that you were, Ruthie, in terms of your family drawing you into things and getting you to pray with people and leading things. I was always kind of around towards the front of church because I was just a disrupted child of a vicar who wanted my dad's attention, so always very comfortable at the front of church, very occasionally actually involved. I was in my church choir, and I remember a few times where I was involved at the front of things. I think Dad got us involved, but it wasn't until Dad became Archdeacon of Carlisle and we moved to Carlisle, lived next to a cathedral, that I started getting way extracurricular in things outside of family. So it was year 8. We moved in year 7. Year 8, a new diocesan youth officer / school chaplain started, and we had him round to dinner. His name's Paul Wheelhouse. Shout out to Paul if you're listening. And he, I think at that point, immediately spotted me as someone he could kind of use. Not that sounds bad, but someone who he could get involved and kind of encourage me, but also I could be, as we go into church and we find our allies and the people who are going to be our helpers. And he very quickly got me involved. He was running a youth congregation called, it was a text speak for Angel, 0 : closed bracket. We called it Squiggle. Gosh, it's so early 2000s. And he got me involved in a worship band and then started getting me involved in leading things. He was running a Christian Union at the school, and he got me involved with leading that. And just gradually, almost like, kind of, they talk about that kind of boiling a frog metaphor, which is a horrible metaphor, but for kind of gradually increasing the temperature so you don't notice it's happening.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So it felt like I just gradually was being more and more involved until I got to sixth form, and I looked at myself and I realised a huge part of my identity was not in the things which the school was saying I was supposed to be interested in, which was my academics, or any other school extracurriculars, but actually it was the church stuff. And I got way extracurricular in kind of being in a worship band and leading this youth congregation and occasionally preaching at it and leading Christian Union sessions as well, and then going along to the early morning midweek communion and the chaplaincy and the lunchtime communion, and just being way extracurricular with it. And you could see, like, my friends, in a way that they were used to it because that was me, but also it was not engaging with a whole load of stuff they were doing, because I was like, no, I've got to go to chaplaincy now. And I got so extracurricular with chaplaincy that I had a key to the chaplaincy room.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was that.
That's very Willow-coded.
I'm very very much I was Willow, I think. Yeah. If I was Ruthie, you were Buffy. I was Willow. What about you, Ross?
I guess, does that make me Xander by default? The kind of sexless, lame incel. who hangs out with the girls, but actually that's where he's happiest. So yeah, what was teenage Ross like? What was my extracurricular faith like? Well, I was a Mish kid. So I was a missionary kid in Kenya for 3 years when I was 13 to 16. And I was part of a cell group. And every new year, our family would go with lots of other families to Brackenhurst, which in Kenya, which was like a big evangelical conference, I guess. And I remember being involved with drama and stuff. So that was kind of that kind of thing. And then I had like a "What Would Jesus Do" wristband, and I had Christian posters in my bedroom, so like, yeah, there was some Lord of the Rings stuff as well, but it was mostly the Christian posters. So that was kind of
hold on.
That was wild.
What kind of Christian posters are we talking? Like the cat ones with I do
all
things with Christ who strengthens me and all this stuff.
Are you talking Christian bands?
No. So neither of those. They were kind of inspirational, but not quite the cat one.
Quote.
One of them wasn't actually all that Christian. It was a whole load of rubber ducks, and one of them was red, and it said, "Don't be afraid to be different" or something. One of them was like the Lion of Judah, and it was like lion coming out with clouds.
Wow.
I remember that one distinctly. I can't remember the other ones. One was green and yellow. I remember that much, but I think anyway. So that my brother had massive Lord of the Rings posters. I had things I cut out of a magazine. I had massive Christian posters. And I would listen to, I had Christian CDs, and I'd go to bed listening to worship music, like Michael W. Smith, Delirious, a little bit.
Yeah.
So that's not really extracurricular. That's just, culture, I guess. I guess I got extracurricular when I was doing my A-levels back in the UK, living in Yorkshire. The curate in the village where we lived got me involved helping out at an after-school club in the primary school. So me and Becky would get off the school bus, so we'd go to the primary school and we'd help out with this Christian after-school club, where we did puppetry. And we were taken away one weekend. We went away to a Christian puppetry workshop. So that was a whole thing. Wow. And in the same way that you talked about doing a service, Ruthie, when I think I was a student. Maybe it was before I went to university. I asked Andy if I could do a service on a Sunday morning based on Disney. So I did a Disney service. I don't know if I mentioned that here before, but I may have done. But yeah, I did a service based on friendship and sacrifice, and it was all very Disney. I didn't really like the Christian Union at the college that I went to. I went occasionally, but it wasn't my vibe.
I feel CUs are quite Marmite, aren't they? They really work for some people, and they really don't work for others.
When I went to university, I knew the Christian Union wasn't right for me. I did some drama stuff with a drama group out of it, but I didn't go to any of their stuff. But I didn't find the chaplaincy either. I kind of fell through the cracks there, really.
It was same for me. It was the church. Just going to a Anglican church. That's what was feeding me. But all of this, I think it's important to note that we were all teenagers doing this stuff. And people trusted us and gave us opportunities, guided us, kind of like Buffy in some ways. And I think that's really important to note, because I think sometimes we think teenagers and kids can't do stuff in church and that you've got to be a proper grown-up to do things. But actually, it's a really important thing to do and to encourage that, and, not be in a place where they aren't represented and involved in the process.
Yeah. And talking about being teenagers, why don't we expose some of our geekiest, most way extracurricular teenage Christian weird moments? I'll start. I just feel we need to share our awkward teenagerness. I think it was something like year 8, year 9. We had to do a presentation on I don't even know what it was on. It was a history project or something. I don't think it was religious studies. And I decided to tell the whole class about Holy Week. And go through each stage of day of Holy Week, what happened.
Aww.
Oh my goodness, Kate. What about you guys? What kind of
I'm tempted to just leave that there and just go, didn't do any of that, Kate.
No. I became I remember people asking me questions. Like I remember one of my classmates asking me, like during a free period, about what I really thought about sex before marriage.
Oh yeah, I got that.
I was like, oh okay, that's interesting, and it was a really nice discussion. It wasn't confrontational, and like she told me that she was having sex with her boyfriend, and I was like, okay, and I mean they're married and have a kid now, but you know it's like okay, and I found it really interesting, and good for you. But yeah, no, I found it really interesting. And I think I always took those questions not as, well, I'm going to give you the answer, but as as a sort of reflective opportunity to think, okay, I don't know. Anyway. I was known to be a Christian, but I don't really know why people knew I was a Christian. I can't really remember why that would have been so obvious, really. Anyway.
WWJD band, baby.
No, I didn't know I was wearing it then.
It became fashionable because Dermot O'Leary wore one, and I remember in sixth form, one of the girls who had previously, I think, been a bit teasing of me for being openly Christian said, "Where'd you get one of those from?" And I said, "Oh, from a Christian bookshop."
Did you guys have frog ones as well?
Oh yeah,
my brother had
on
frog.
God.
Yeah,
and then it was push.
Yeah,
pray until something happens.
Gosh. Wow.
Yeah.
The early 2000s were such a wild time to be a teenage Christian.
Yeah, I need us to move away from the cringe of us in the 90s and noughties. We've got a creative pitch now. We're going to go back to Sunnydale, that lovely, gorgeous American town built over the Hellmouth. And we're just going to imagine, what if we were the vicar or the pastor of Sunnydale?
Yeah.
Minister.
What does parish ministry look like in the Episcopal Church of Sunnydale?
I think you might have vampires in your graveyard.
Yeah.
I think firstly you're gonna hear weird sounds as you're closing up the church from the crypts, and either you're going to be really naive and oblivious. These random teenagers hanging out in the churchyard. Do you try to start an outreach program for the teenagers hanging out in the churchyard?
Absolutely, you do. Yeah.
Well, here's a question. First of all, I mean, obviously we're based in England where graveyards and cemeteries are associated with churches as well as not with churches. I don't know that that's the case in America.
Oh.
No, I don't either.
I think they're all private cemeteries. So it's not necessarily your turf, but that's not to stop you from doing outreach to the teenagers hanging out in graveyards.
And I suppose because the church buildings in the US are more recently built than the ones in the UK, they're less likely to have creepy crypts underneath.
Yes.
So, okay, at least we're not dealing with that, because I really don't know, like, I think that kind of stops us right there then, if you've got vampires living in the church crypt.
Would you lean more into into the Catholic tradition or into a more evangelical tradition, as it were?
I'd probably lean on a more Catholic end. I think you would be kind of providing spiritual comfort and support, and I'm guessing you're going to be a supplier
of holy water and crucifixes.
You've got to be in the know.
I'm totally going to be praying everything away and getting prayer warriors around and going, yeah, let's sort this out. And Ugh.
So you'd be going for prayer walks around the cemeteries as part of the outreach program.
Absolutely. Yeah, nice. Absolutely. And I think if you recognised what was going on, you would be you're bringing in the big guns of, you know, archdeacon, bishop, the what's the title of the Ghostbuster vicar? What are they
The
called?
Exorcist. Deliverance Minister.
Deliverance Ministry team.
Yeah. So the person who's in charge of deliverance ministry and going, there's some weird stuff going on here. Come and sort this out, please.
Right, but in this world, do we think the church is in on this secret society, this secret information about demons being real and vampires being real? Or do you think you're working outside of that knowledge? Because I think what you're being Vicar of Sunnydale would look very different if you are in league with the watches or with the information versus not being aware. Because if you're not aware, you're going to go down contacting Archdeacon, whatever the US Episcopalian Church equivalent is, and you're going to do everything you should be doing. But if you're in the know, what is the church's role?
Do you just go, Buffy? Where are you?
Or like,
I suppose there's a huge question theologically that you'd have to wrestle with if you are in the know as to what is your role in and ministry with and to demons.
Yeah.
The questions are asked during in the series, but can the demons be redeemed? Can, you know, is there transformation to happen there? So.
Yeah.
But how do you do that safely for yourself and for your non-demon congregation?
Yeah, and what would you do? So assuming you're taking funerals for people who you recognise might have died by a vampire bite and will rise again in 3 days or however many days it is after they've been buried. Like, do you
what? Is
go
that
ahead
part of
with
the law?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
Sorry. They rise again.
Oh.
They die and they seem to be dead, and then they rise again a few days later, I believe.
Well, what Buffy said something about, because they're worried about that with that guy, and she was like, "Oh no, all his blood's been drained, so he's fine."
Yeah.
Some people are eaten, and then I think to become a vampire, you need to drink the blood of the vampire who bit you, so it becomes a consensual,
but
reciprocal thing.
But the period of change and transformation, I think, basically the human dies, and then the demon makes their home in the body.
Certainly, you're going to have a really interesting, vibrant funeral ministry.
You're going to have a really vibrant funeral ministry.
And I think All Souls will be really interesting. You'd have a lot of people who are coming to remember those who have died. But actually...
so if you knew about the 3-day rule, would you bury them with, pre-staked or with some garlic in the coffin just to kind of deal with them?
Would you be working with the funeral directors to kind of circumvent? Like, would you have the coroners spotting? Oh, we've got puncture marks. They might turn. Let's put a stake in them in the coffin.
Let's just fill it with holy water and then deal with that.
I think, I mean, in terms of fitting in with the storylines, I think either you have a vicar who is completely oblivious and then over the course of the show comes to learn more and takes part and becomes essentially kind of on the support end of providing holy water, etc., and kind of sanctuary. And
where does Buffy get her supply from? Does she order it online?
Also helping on the research end, I guess.
I mean, I think there's also, there's the whole theology of, if you do lean into the Catholic side of things, we gather and we drink Jesus' blood.
Yeah.
And we eat Jesus' body. So actually, I think there's some interesting reflection to go on there in terms of ministry to Sunnydale, in terms of, well, actually, Jesus' blood is the blood of life that will give us life, as opposed to those which bring us death.
So maybe you're working to help redeem vampires. Particularly, I could see a character who is alongside Angel and or Spike kind of helping them work out what morality is. And or some other vampire. I think it would be a really interesting one-off story to tell about kind of maybe the vicar's spouse or child or sibling or friend has been changed, and they are working to help like redeem them, or almost like, you know, in Shaun of the Dead, at the end of Shaun of the Dead, Shaun has Danny kind of kept in his home to play video games with as a redeemed zombie, like almost like that sort of storyline, except maybe the vicar's friend vampire gets off the program and Buffy has to hunt them down.
I think it could also be interesting if there was a priest character who became a vampire themselves, and suddenly didn't have access to, you know, they couldn't go into their church anymore. They couldn't wear the crucifix around their neck anymore, and almost as a reflection of what it might mean to be kicked out of the church for who you are, and to lose your sense of identity.
But also if
CDM coding
lost their soul, like would you still have the desire? Because the vampires still have their human memories, so surely there would still be a sense of, I remember this all being true to me.
Yeah.
Would you? I guess we're going back into the Twilight and the self-loathing of Edward and Carlisle, of kind of being like, well, I've lost my soul, but I can still, you know, and although I'm damned for eternity, I can still, try to be good. Or do you say, well, my soul is in heaven, so now I can do everything I wasn't allowed to do anymore before?
But certainly there would still be that reflection of belonging. You know, I belonged in some way to that community, that place, and now I do not. And yet...
Genius.
Yeah. Ruthie.
I think, to sum up in some ways, that actually, to be the Vicar of Sunnydale, you would either be there for a very short period of time going, absolutely no thank you, I am out, or you would be there a long time because you know it and this becomes your passion, your calling, and your drive.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wouldn't want it as a job.
No.
No, thank you.
Pass.
If
maybe we just don't have a vicar, because anyone they send there says, nope.
No, thank you.
No, thank you.
Or just someone really nutty ends up there.
Is that what makes it a Hellmouth? Because it doesn't have a church.
I don't know. There you go.
So we have talked about Buffy, the vampire slayer, her call to being a slayer, and it being totally extracurricular. And we've reflected on what it meant for us to be extracurricular with our calling as teenagers of faith. And then we've just finished off reflecting on what a Vicar of Sunnydale might look like, and what their ministry might be. Thank you for joining us. Let us know in the comments what you think the Vicar of Sunnydale should get up to. And also let us know about Dungeons and Dibley and your thoughts on whether we should go down that route. I think we want to. Anyway, so thank you for listening. God bless you.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Vicars Watch Dibley. Thank you to Nat for editing our ramblings.
Any opinions expressed are our own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Church of England or any other organisation with which we are affiliated.
If you like our podcast, leave us a review, follow us on social media and share it with your friends. And, as always, bless you for listening.
Arrgh.
How many real vampires are there?
I don't know. How many real vampires are there?
None, unless you count Dracula.
Nice. I like that one.